Okay. One point is that you had asked me to share the slides yesterday, but I made a few changes to the slides yesterday, so I did not send it. Today after the class, I will send it. So we were looking at Byzantine faults. Are you being able to see the slides?
Yes, sir.
Yes. So we were saying that in addition to faults of the general type, which we call as failed stop systems, where the system either the system crashes and produces no output after failure, or even consistent failures, where in the failed case, after failure, a component produces the same wrong output to everybody. Byzantine failures are of slightly different kind, where uh, where a failed unit or a failed component can produce different outputs to different dependent units. So in the sense that if there is a component and the output of this component goes to multiple dependent units, it can produce different outputs to different units when failed. So such kinds of faults are called Byzantine faults. Such kind of failures are called Byzantine failures. And we as we told that we were understanding this problem with respect to the Byzantine generals problem, where um, in the parlance of cyber physical systems, we said that we have a system in which we have a sensor which is producing, let us say, out its output to multiple receivers or controllers, and uh, the controllers and the and also the sensor could be could may undergo Byzantine failures. And to do a modeling of this, we took the example of a Byzantine army where which is trying to besiege a city, and this army has a commander in chief, and the under the commander in chief you have different divisions of the army. Each division has their own commanders or generals. Now each of the army divisions are attacking the city from different sides. The armies cannot see each other. The different army units cannot see each other, and therefore the only way to communicate between different army units, subunits, are by passing messages, two-party oral messages. And what they have to do is either they have to all attack together on the city, or they have to all decide together to retreat. Now the problem arises when some inconsistency arises, when some of the army units decide to attack, and some of the army units decide not to attack or retreat. Now here, hmm, the so the problem we saw was to to ensure that what do we want to ensure in this algorithm or in this fault tolerance mechanism. What do we want to achieve? The decision algorithm must satisfy the following conditions of interactive consistency. So inconsistency means that some of the army units are attacking, some of the army units are are retreating. Now, on the basis of what? The some of the loyal army units are attacking and some of the loyal army units are retreating. On the basis of what? On the basis of the information that they know that they have got from the commander in chief. That means the problem arises when some of the army units understand that the commander in chief asked them to retreat, while other army units understand that the commander in chief asked them to attack. That is the problem. We have to avoid that. So all the all the loyal army units should decide same on what the commander-in-chief asks them to do. Okay. And in any case, if the commander-in-chief tells, if the commander-in-chief is a traitor, he may maliciously tell different give different orders to different army units. Even in the presence of such a possibility of such betrayal by the commander in chief himself, the loyal army unit should be able to concur on what they should do. Either they will all attack together or they will all retreat together. So these form the two consistency conditions, interactive consistency conditions. So IC1, interactive consistency condition 1, it says that all loyal generals must agree on the same plan of action. So all functional, non-faulty units must arrive at an agreement on the value that was transmitted by the original source, that is the sensor, right? They should all agree that the commander-in-chief asked us to do this. All loyal units, all loyal army units, or all the working controllers. Interactive consistency 2, it says that if the commander-in-chief is loyal, the loyal generals must obey his order. If the original, which in the parlance of cyber physical systems, what this says is that if the original source or the sensor is functional, the value that the loyal army generals or the working controllers agree upon must be the value that was sent by the original source. Okay, this is what the algorithm tries to achieve. Now, we do not want to, what we do not want is to identify the traitors. This is not the objective of the algorithm. We should be consistent. This is what it wants to do. So if these two consistency conditions are always satisfied, then the algorithm is successful. Now, the traitor's aim, as we told, is to make the system inconsistent. Understanding this is sufficient for us. And we say that if we have n, the total number of units encompassing the sensor and all the controllers together, if the number of units is less than 3 times the number of non-functional units plus 1, 3 plus 1, 3 into m plus 1, where m is the number of non-functional units. So if n is less than 3m plus 1, then the algorithm does not work. The algorithm cannot enforce, the algorithm that we are going to study cannot enforce these two interactive consistency conditions. However, if n is greater than equals to 3m plus 1, that means the total number of units, sensor plus the number of controllers, is greater than or equal to 3m plus 1, 3 into the number of non-functional units plus 1, then the algorithm that we are going to study will ensure that the two interactive consistency conditions can always be satisfied, which means that the number of working units should be more than twice the number of failed units, right? So at most 1/3 of the or not at most, at least 2/3 of the um, total number of units should be working. No, not at least. More than 2/3 of the more than 2/3 of the units should be working. Okay. Okay, so let us look into the Byzantine algorithm. The Byzantine algorithm BYZNM, where n is the total number of nodes and m is the number of failed units. It's a recursive algorithm, initially called with the arguments n comma m. n the total number of units again, and m is the number of PL units. Now, when biz n comma m is called, the first step that it does is that wherever this biz n comma m is called, it disseminates the value that it has to the remaining units. So originally biz n comma m will be called on the sensor. So at the sensor, when biz n comma m is called, it disseminates the information to each of the n minus 1 receivers. So here in step 1, we see that the original source disseminates the information to each of the n minus 1 receivers. If m equals to 0, we don't go into step 3. We'll look at m equal this case later. Achha, by the way, are you with me? I am not hearing any sound from anywhere.
Yes, sir. Yes.
Okay. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Fine. So in step 2, what is happening? If m greater than 0, if m greater than 0, which means that, let us say, if I have 4 units and I know that the number of PL units is 1, 4 comma 1. If it is 4 comma 1, then if m greater than 0, each of the n minus 1 receivers now acts as an original source and runs biz n minus 1 comma m minus 1 to send out its received value to the n minus 2 other n minus 2 receivers. So basically what happens, if m greater than 0, then the n minus 1 receivers now acts as the original source and essentially repeat step 1, but calling biz with n minus 1 comma m minus 1. Why n minus 1? Because it does not send the message back from where it is sent. So if my controller R1 has received the information from the sensor, this message is not sent back to the sensor again. It sends it to the remaining n minus 2. So when I'm calling biz with n minus 1, I'm sending to n minus 2 receivers. And I reduce the value of m by 1 as well. Okay. If a unit does not get a message from another unit, it assumes the default value. So there is, again, we are assuming that we have a default value at the beginning of the algorithm. We'll take an example. We have a default value on the agreement that if it does not get any answer, which means that each of these units has a timer to itself, and if the timer expires, it knows that it has not received a message. So if it does not receive a message within a deadline, then it assumes a default value which is agreed upon by everybody at the beginning itself. Okay. After step 2, each receiver has a vector containing the agreed value received, number 1, from the original source and from each of the other receivers. Okay. If m greater than 0, then each receiver takes a vote over its vector to determine the value that it received. If no majority exists, we use the default value. Okay. And if m equals to 0, the value received in step 1, that means from the original source, is used. With this basic understanding or scratchy understanding, let us get into an example to understand how it works. Now, in the example, we will use a few notations. So the notations are like this. If A and B are units, then A dot B n means that A sent B the message n. This is point number 1. So this is point number 1. If A and B are units, then A dot Bn means that A sent B the message n. If U is a string of units, A1, A2, dot, dot, up to Am, and B is a unit, then U dot Bn means that B received the message n from An, who claims to have received it from Am minus 1, and so on, dot, dot, up to A1 goes back. And last one, a message that is not sent is denoted by 5. So if the timer expires and the message has not been received, it is denoted by 5. For example, A.B5 means that the message A was supposed to send to B was never sent or lost. Okay. Now let us come to the example. So let m equals to 1. First example, let m equals to 1. That means one failed unit. And we have n equals to 3m plus 1. That means total 4 units. So I have one sensor S and 3 receivers R1, R2, R3. Suppose, and we suppose that the sensor is faulty. So if the sensor is faulty, it can send any arbitrary message. So let us say that the sensor sends messages 1 to R1 and R2 and sends the message 0 to R3. So S dot R1 is 1, S dot R2 is 1, but S dot R3 is 0. So the sensor sends message 1 to R1 and R2 and sends message 0 to R3. The default is assumed to be 1 in this example. Now in this case, so what is so the our commander in chief is not loyal in this case. So if the commander in chief is not loyal, all the controllers must agree on the same action. That means they must decide that they must decide that this is the action that my commander has asked me to take, asked me to do, or else um, the other option is that if there is no quorum, then it will go to the default values. Everybody should decide then on the default value. So in step 2 of this biz, so original was biz 4 comma 1. Now in step 2, R1, R2 and R3, each one receives this S dot R1, R1 receives S dot R1, R2 receives S dot R2, R3 receives S dot R3. So R1, R2 and R3 each acts as the source and runs biz 3 comma 0 on it, because biz n minus 1 comma m minus 1. So then the messages that are sent out. So what does R1 send? R1 has received 1. So where will R1 send? R1 will send to R2 and R3. It will not send back to S. So R1 sends message 1 to R2 and R1 sends message 1 to R3. R2 also has received 1 from S. So R2 and R2, R1, R2, R3 all are loyal, all are correctly functioning. So R2 sends R1 1, R2 sends R3 1, and while R3 received 0, so R3 sends both R1 and R2 0. So now what information does R1 have? R1 has received 1 from the sensor, has received 1 from R2 because due to this message. So R1 has received 1 from R2 and R1 has received 0 from R3. So the vector, so now R1 has a vector of 3 values on what the sensor has sent it. So the original, that S dot R1 it has, which is 1. It has S dot R2 dot R1, which is 1. And it has S dot R3 dot R1, which is 0. Likewise, let us say R2. R2 has also received 1 from S, has received, R2 has received 1 from R1, this one, and R2 has received 0 from R3. Similarly, R3 also has 3 values, and all 3 values are 1, 1, 0. If we take majority, we will see that it yields 1. So the interactive consistency is achieved in this case because we have run biz 3 comma 0. So the recursion ends there and and we have a quorum
Hello.
for each at each receiver we have a quorum. Yes,
Sir, actually,
yes.
S dot R1 of 1 means sensor sending a message 1 to R1, right, sir?
S dot R1 means sensor
Sensor
sending
sending
a
message
message
to,
to R1.
yes, sir, similar,
R1, the
yes, sir,
value 1.
the value 1.
S dot
So,
R1 1. Yes.
yes, sir, in the case of S dot R1 dot R2 of 1 means,
Hmm.
it
It
means that
means that
the R1 receives 1 from S1 and it will send that message to R2.
it means something like this. Mm, the R2 receives the message 1 from R1, which R1 got from S. R2 receives the message 1 from R1, that message which R1 got from S.
Yes, sir, got it.
So, so basically, if you go into this U dot Bn, if U is a string of units, A1, A2 dot dot up to AM, and B is a unit, then U dot Bn means that B received the message N from AM, who claims to have received it from AM minus 1, and so on. Okay.
Yes, sir, okay,
Why
sir, thank
claims
you.
to have? Because they can be traitors as well.
Yes.
Okay. But here we have received we have concurrence, and we get the value 1. So now let us go to the next example. In the next example, we have m equals to 2 failed units. So we know that if we have to have the algorithm working, then the minimum total number of units that are required will be 7. Why? 3 into 2 plus 1. 3m plus 1 units we require. So m equals to 2 here. So we have one sensor and 6 receivers or 6 controllers. And out of these 6 receivers, let us say R1 and R2, R6, R1 and R6 are the failed receivers. So have undergone Byzantine failures. The default we assume here to be 0. Now, so originally the sensor will run B7, 2. Now, but then no, here the sensor is working correctly. The sensor will send consistent messages to everybody. So S.R1, S.R2, S.R3, S.R4, R5, R6, all of them has the value 1. All of them has the value. So sensor nicely sends the same value 1 to all its receivers. In step 2, each receiver then runs B6, 6, 1, right? Now let us consider the case of R1 in particular here, because R1 is a unit that has undergone Byzantine failures. So in this case, for R1, let it be that R1 sends R2 1, R1 sends R3 2, R1 sends R4 3, R1 sends R5 4, and R1 sends R6 0. Because it can even not send anything at all, because R1 is a unit that has undergone Byzantine failures, so it is free to send anything to anybody, any arbitrary thing to anybody. Now, in step 2 of base 6, 1, so now if we come to base 6, 1, with respect to what R1 has sent, so each of the remaining receivers uses base 5, 0 to disseminate the message received from R1, right? So now let us say R1 R1 sent R2 the value 1. Now R2 is a nicely working unit, so it will send R3 the value 1, R4 the value 1, R5 the value 1, and R6 the value 1. What is it sending? S dot R1. The value of S dot R1 as perceived by R2 is 1. So it sends the message 1 as the value of S dot R1 to the other units R3, R4, R5 and R6. Similarly, R3 is also working, R4 is also working, R5 is also working. So they whatever they actually have the value of S dot R1, they very nicely send the same values, loyally sends those values to the other units. Okay. So you see S dot R1 dot R3 dot R2 is 2, S dot R1 dot R3 dot R4 is 2 likewise. Now, now, so so then let us see at the end of this phase, after base 5 comma 0 has been run, then after base 5 comma 0 has been run, then let us see what are the values that R2 have for S dot R1. So it has received the value, the S dot R1 dot R2 is 1. So the value of S dot R1 that R2 has received directly from R1 is 1. The value of S dot R1 that R2 has got from R3 is 2. The value of S dot R1 that R3 has got from R4 is 3. The value of S dot R1 that R2 has got from R5 is 4. And the value of S dot R1 that it has received from R6 is 1. Now we have to understand that from R6 is again is arbitrary, will behave arbitrarily, because R6 is also a failed unit and hence it can get anything. Now because of this majority, that the total number of units is 3m plus 1, in spite of m of these units behaving arbitrarily, we see in spite of that, we see because you have n equals to 3m plus 1, we do not have any majority. We could possibly have a majority also if n was less than 3m plus 1. Majority on what? Majority on the value of S dot R1. We did not have any majority on the value of S dot R1 just because the total number of units is 3m plus 1. That means more than two-thirds of the units are working correctly. Because of that, no consistency could possibly be received, could possibly be reached. But if you had more number of arbitrary units, means arbitrarily failed units, which is more than one-third arbitrarily failed units, or one-third or more arbitrarily failed units, then because they are behaving arbitrarily, you could also possibly have got a quorum of some majority. So now because of because we do not have that, we do not have a quorum, and so S dot R1, for the value of S dot R1, all the working units R2, R3, R4, R5, these four working units, they all know that there is no majority and hence will resort to the default value of 0. So all these units, receivers, will settle on the default value of 0. The other point is that fine, they resort they from for S dot R1 they all settle to 0, but for the other values, for the other because the other receivers are working correctly, S dot R2, S dot R3, those values, on those values they will get a quorum of 1. The correctly working receivers R2, R3, R4, R5 will get a majority value of 1 on S dot R2, S dot R3, S dot R4 and S dot R5. Do you understand why? Is there any confusion that they will get a majority of 1 Similarly, as they could not get any majority on S dot R1, they will get a majority on S dot R2, S dot R3, S dot R4 and S dot R5. Just be working it out in just the same way, you will get it. Do you have any confusion here? Hello? Are you there with me?
Sir, in case
Hello?
of R1, sir, in
Yes.
case of R1, when it has sent this faulty values to the other receivers, why some
Hmm.
receivers have resorted to this default value of 0? Please explain it again, sir.
Because there was no quorum, there was no majority. Why is there no majority?
Okay, so you are saying that R5 is receiving 1, 2, 3, 4, and 0. That's why it
Okay,
has resort to.
let us understand what is the value of S dot R1 that R2 has. See, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. You just go vertically. The first one is the original value that R2 has, right? S dot R1, because that is what it has sent to R3, so it has the value 1. R2 has got the value of 2 from R3 for S dot R1. If I in the second line, see the second line, R2 has got the value of 2 from R3 for the value of S dot R1. R2 has got the value of 3 from R4 for the value of S dot R1. R2 has got the value of 4 from R5 for the value of S dot R1. Are you getting what I'm trying to say?
Yes, sir.
Now, if it creates an interactive consistency vector for the value of S dot R1, what does R2 get? R2 has the values 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. So there is no majority. And who are the ones who can behave completely arbitrarily? Here, what the original one S dot R1 and from R6. If you leave out those two, the other three will be working correctly. R2, R3, R3, R4 and R5 with respect to R2 I am saying. So if R1 was correct, even if two of the units have failed, it will still get a majority. It is not getting a majority because it should not get a majority on what S dot R1 has sent it, because R1 is a failed unit. Any questions?
If we get two-third of the units, then we will say it as a majority answer.
Majority here means half plus 1.
Yes, sir. Okay.
More number.
Yes.
That condition will be fulfilled if you have 3m plus 1 total number of units, where m is the number of failed units. This is the basis. If this is okay and everybody says that this is okay, then I will shift to fault tolerant networks.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So now what we have studied till now is with respect to, we have studied different types of reliability measures in fault tolerant hardware. Now we will use these understanding for fault tolerant networks. So what will we be essentially studying? The individual components, say processors and memories in a cyber physical system, are connected through links and switch boxes. So whatever be the network protocol that you use, ultimately, if you are within a chip, then you are sending messages from sender to receiver through unidirectional or bidirectional links. which are interspersed with switch boxes. So basically, suppose let us say what is the type? Let us say these are your units. And you have a set of switch boxes. So either you can have direct links between your units, cyber physical system, let us say processors or plants, controllers, you can have direct, or you could have connection through switches. Switches could also be interconnected. It could be something like this. So, which means that you can connect from, let us say this one is 1, this is 2. You can connect from 1 to 2 through this direct unit, possible. These are called links. The connections are called links. Or you can connect through switch boxes. Switch box is a junction point. So what does switch box do? So individual components, say processors and memories in a cyber physical system, are connected through links and switch boxes. Switchbox allows a given component to communicate with several other components without having a separate link to each of them. So now if you did not have a switched network, what would it have? You had to have a dedicated link to each other component that you want to connect to. What is the effect? For example, in automotive systems, previously we had a time when we had dedicated links between components. But what was the effect? There are 2 points, the 2 issues. One is that the wiring will become extremely cumbersome because there will be a lot of wires, each wire connecting two dedicated a pair of units. So a dedicated wire for each pair of units. The second is that, so the wiring in the system will be extremely heavy and cumbersome. The second is that the cost will increase. In fact, there is a third problem. Most of the bandwidth at all times in these dedicated links will remain unutilized. So hence, I told 3 points as to why do we have a switched network. One, instead of dedicated connections between components. So why don't we have dedicated connections between components? Because in a cyber physical system, it will make the wiring extremely cumbersome because we will require dedicated links between every component, between every pair of components between which we want to have communication. The second point is that the cost will increase because we need to have dedicated wires. Instead, if we have a switched network, as we can see, let us say link 1 and suppose this one is link 4. So link 1 link 1 can be connected to link 4, link 5, link 6, all through this switch box 1 and switch box 2. In fact, it can also be connected to link 2 node 1 or unit 1 can be connected to unit 4, 5, 6, 2, all of them through the switch boxes 1 and 2 here. So the point is that switch boxes allowed us not to have dedicated links, reducing cost and harnessing the available bandwidth in a better way. Because if you have dedicated links, most of the time communication will not be there and the wires will just be lying, no communication, and the bandwidth will be just wasted. Okay. So switchbox allows a given component to communicate with several other components without having a separate link to each of them. The network's links and switch boxes establish one or more paths between the sender of a message and its receiver. So the first point in fault tolerant networks that we told is that components in a cyber physical system will be connected via a collection of links and switch boxes. Point 1. These links and switch boxes will establish this network. Now these networks will establish this set of links and switch boxes which form the network will establish paths from sender to receiver, right? Where sender is the source of a message and receiver is the destination of a message. Now, these links and switch boxes could either be unidirectional or bidirectional. So we are seeing the options here. So first point, second point, third point. Okay. Then now, as we said that through the links and switch boxes that we have, we may have only a single path between source and destination. Now, if we have a single path between a source and destination, any fault of a link or switch box along the path will disconnect the source destination pair. This is what we do not want in fault tolerant networks. What do we want? We want to have more than one path. So how can we introduce fault tolerance in network? So if we have only one path and no other mechanism adopted, then with a single path from source to destination, any fault in the link or the switch box in any of the links or a switch box in the path will disconnect the source from the destination, and thus that network is not fault tolerant. Okay, if you have a scenario like that, that network is not fault tolerant. Fault tolerance is thus achieved through redundancy by having what? Multiple paths connecting source to destination pair, or having spare units that can be switched in to replace failed units. So we can have spare links and spare switch boxes which can be brought in to enhance resilience of the network against faults. So immediately, are you getting the connection between what we already studied and what we are going to study? Yes? Is that okay?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Thus, there is a need to evaluate. So now, what will we be majorly seeing? We will be seeing different a few types of topologies, and on which we will see how many of these systems will originally be non-fault tolerant. So we will see how we can introduce redundancy to imbibe fault tolerance, point number one. The second is that given such redundancy, we then need to numerically evaluate the resilience of such a network, with redundancy against faults. So there is a need to evaluate the resilience to faults provided by redundancy, point number one. And the second, how that resilience degrades. So degradation in the network operation as faults accumulate. So if faults become more and more, how does it degrade? At what rate does that resilience? So if you have multiple paths, then with one failure, how does with a certain network topology, how does the resilience decrease? At what rate does the resilience decrease, or how much does the resilience decrease due to a single fault? So that needs to be studied. We will study a few types of fault tolerant network topologies. In particular, we will study the extra stage or multi-stage networks, the interstitial mesh, the redundant crossbar, hypercube, and point-to-point ad hoc networks. Now, these networks, you have to understand that these network topologies can be applied. These network topologies can be applied to cyber physical systems within a single chip. These connecting multiple units on the wafer. It could be applied to multiple units across on the board, on a PCB, or on the board connecting multiple units in a more distributed multiprocessor system. It could also be a more distributed, let us say a smart grid. We could also have some of these types of networks could also be a more distributed WAN-like structure, wide area network structures, where the topology will still be there. Switch boxes, junction points, links will be there. But we would, instead of messages, we will talk about packet transmission, where packets will be where messages inside, when we are talking of more concentrated things, like for example on a wafer, on a board, we are talking of messages. When we are talking in a distributed LAN or WAN like system, we are talking about packets, where packets are where messages could be considered to be formed of multiple packets. Okay, but our analysis will still remain same. Any questions up to this? Hello, are you with me?
No,
Are you
sir.
hearing? Yes. With this, let us go into the first type of system, the multi-stage network. So we have multiple measures of resilience, etc. We will come to that tomorrow, but within the time that we have today, let us quickly learn one type of network. So the non-fault tolerant version of this multi-stage network is called the butterfly network, and it is composed of 2x2 switch boxes. So a 2x2 switch box has any 2x2 switch box has 2 inputs and 2 outputs. So a butterfly network is a system that connects a set of inputs to a set of outputs, from inputs to outputs. Okay, and this again, because it is a network, according to our basic definition, it will be composed of a set of links and switch boxes from the inputs to the outputs. So this is the general picture. Now, in this case, we are saying in particular that for the multi-stage butterfly network, the switch boxes are of 2x2 types. So what do we mean by a 2x2 switch box? A 2x2 switch box has 2 inputs and 2 outputs. And a 2x2 switch box has 4 different settings possible on the 2 inputs and outputs. The first setting S, or straight setting. So what is the straight setting? This is the straight setting. This one is the straight setting. So the top input line connected to the top output line, and the bottom input line connected to the bottom output line. This is the straight setting. The cross setting of a switch box is this: the top input line connected to the bottom output, the bottom input connected to the top output. So the top input line connected to the bottom output, and bottom input line connected to the top output. The upper broadcast setting, the top input line is connected to both the top and bottom outputs. And the lower broadcast, that is why it is called broadcast, the bottom input line is connected to both the output lines. Okay. Now here, this figure here shows you an example of a 3-stage butterfly network. So 3-stage means 3 vertical lines, 3 sets of switch boxes. See, this one is a stage 0, this one is stage 1, this one is stage 2. Through 3 vertical sets of switch boxes constitute this network. These are my set of inputs, these are my set of outputs. Right? Now, a k-stage butterfly network, for us, it is a 3-stage network. We have 2 to the power k inputs and 2 to the power k outputs. That is the first point. So now we have to see how we can build. First, understand the non-fault tolerant butterfly network, and only then can we do fault tolerance analysis on this. So we have 2 to the power k inputs and 2 to the power k outputs. So in a 3-stage network, we will have 8 inputs and 8 outputs. Why? Because k equals to 3 stage. And at each stage, we have k minus 1 switch boxes, 2 to the power k minus 1 switch boxes. So at each stage we have 2 to the power k minus 1 switch boxes, because which is a 3-stage network, so 2 to the power k minus 1 equals to 4. So each stage has 4 switch boxes here. Connections follow a recursive pattern from input to output. So we'll see how connections follow a recursive pattern from input to output. So what is this connection? What is this recursive pattern? This is it. This point tells you what is the recursive pattern. The input stage, let us see what is the input stage. The top output of each line of each switch box is connected to the input lines of a 2 to the power k minus 1 cross 2 to the power k minus 1 butterfly, and the bottom output line of each switch box is connected to the input lines of another 2 to the power k minus 1 cross 2 to the power k minus 1 butterfly. So this whole thing is a 2 to the power k butterfly, 3-stage network 2 to the power k butterfly. Now see this part is a 2 to the power k minus 1 butterfly. Again this part is another 2 to the power k minus 1 butterfly. So these two are two separate 2 to the power k minus 1 butterflies. Now, so if for this 3-stage for this 3-stage network, we are saying that the top output line of each output switch box. So at the input stage, so this one is the input stage, this one is the input stage, stage 2 is the input stage. So we are saying that the top output line, so this one, this one, this one, and this one, 0, 1, 2, and 3. These 4 lines go to 1 2 to the power k minus 1 network. So you see this one is 1 2 to the power 4 cross 4 butterfly. This one is another 2 to the power k minus 1 cross 2 to the power k minus 1 butterfly. So you have two 4 cross 4 butterflies, and so 0, 1, 2, and 3 goes to the inputs of the top 2 to the power k minus 1 butterfly. Okay. Then, and the bottom output line of each switch box is connected to the input lines of another 2 to the power k minus 1 butterfly. Okay. Up to this is fine. Next. Okay, I think today's time is up. Anyway, we have to again go back and start from the butterfly. So I will start with butterfly tomorrow. Sorry, next class. I'll start with this butterfly network and go into details, because if we continue, it will take again some time to complete. Let us stop here today. Huh? Hello.
Thank you, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, any question?